And so the Compromise of 1850 failed to pass as an omnibus bill. An omnibus bill is where you package many different proposals together and try to package it as a single bill. This is because each of these 5 planks made enemies. There were those in the South who could not tolerate California coming in as a free state and tipping the balance of North versus South in the Senate. And so they would not vote for the omnibus bill. There were those in the North who seriously objected to the stronger fugitive slave law, and they would not vote for it. Does that make sense? And so if you put all 5 together, it made too many enemies. But by passing each plank individually, they got just enough of a majority for each one that it passed. Okay. I want to briefly touch on what each one and the significance. Point number 1, California's admittance as a free state. Who is that a winner for? Well, it wins for the people of California because they don't want to be a political pawn. They live there, and they just want representation. There are very few slaves there, if any, and so they don't feel that they want slavery as part of their statehood, and so they submit their constitution. So it's good for them. It's good for the North because it tips the balance in the Senate by 2. The rest of the Mexican cession, point number 2, being open to popular sovereignty. Supposedly that's a concession to the South because that opens up everything outside of the Louisiana Purchase now is open to slavery if the people so choose it. However, many Southerners say this is a false benefit to slavery because much of the rest of the cession is mountain and desert. It's Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah. And so they would argue that there's not a lot of plantation-worthy land in those states as much anyway. That California was by far the most desirable location anyway, and it's already been given banned to slavery before they thought the competition had even started. The Texas issue, they lost land claims. New Mexico got compensation. I believe, I should double check this, I believe this was also the proposal that still maintained Texas's right to be split into as many as 5 different states in the future. And if I am forgetting, and that was the previous compromise when Texas was in fact admitted, I do want to briefly talk about that issue of Texas. Why is that considered something people would want, the ability to future split Texas into many different states? Yes?
It adds more representatives to Congress.
The representation may be similar, but specifically in which part of Congress?
The Senate.
In the Senate, because the only way to add to the Senate is not through population, but through more states. It was going to be considered a safety valve because they looked at the Louisiana Purchase and said, holy smokes, there's a lot more free states about to be added. And we don't know where the next slave states might come from. And the compromise was stated that, well, Texas is so large, it could be split into several different slave states as a safety valve. Well, Washington wants to become a state. Well, you create East Texas. Oregon wants to become a state. Well, you create North Texas. Does that make sense? So that would be, because that was on the books. It never happened. It never got seriously debated too much. The Civil War happened very quickly after this, but that was sort of in the back of many people's minds. The slave trade, not slavery, but the slave trade was abolished. So like slave auctions. This was a complaint of foreign diplomats that they said, is this what the United States stands for? Slavery, slave auctions happening in the capital city. It was seen as unseemly. And the fugitive slave law was strengthened. This was the big boon for the South. Take note of a couple fugitive slaves. So look, take some notes on fugitive slave laws here. Remember, they go back to the Constitution. From the founding of the country, there's been an obligation to return fugitive slaves. There have been laws that in the North that have tried to limit their obligation to deliver fugitive slaves. If you recall the Prigg v. Pennsylvania, 1842. Remember that? Prigg, P-R-I-G-G, Prigg v. Pennsylvania, where they tried to limit turning over slaves, and that was overturned in 42 by the Supreme Court in that court case, Prigg v. Pennsylvania. Well, now it was going to strengthen the fugitive slave law where not just states had to give over slaves when it happened to come up, but they had to actively cooperate with slave catchers. It put a big chunk of the burden on northern free states, to have to help catch and turn over slaves and return them to their masters in the South, which was seen as very objectionable. Which brings us to this, the problems with the compromise. Southerners, many called fire eaters because of their anger and vitriol over the subject, saw the fact that there would now be 16 free to 15 slave states because California broke the tie in the Senate as a major problem. That would be a deal breaker. And they severely objected to that. And they said, oh, well, we have popular sovereignty in the Southwest, but much of the Southwest is not all that suitable to the traditional slave and plantation agricultural system of the rest of the South. And they didn't foresee a lot of slavery in the Utah, New Mexico lands, etc. Many northern abolitionists severely objected to the fugitive slave law. They tried to pass personal liberty laws to try to place obstructions in the way of compelling them to catch fellow human beings and return them into slavery. They objected to that, and they tried to pass liberty laws such as the one struck down by Prigg v. Pennsylvania. It's much as we see with abortion or homosexual marriage today, where there's laws passed, there's laws struck down. This was a hot issue of the time, these personal liberty laws, and so some were passed, some were struck down, and that was an issue of the day. One of the most odious parts was it specifically banned fugitives from testifying. So if you're accused of being a fugitive, you can't even testify, even in a northern court, to say, hey, my name's Hank, I've lived on, 3rd Street my entire life, don't send me to the South. You've got me wrong, confused, I'm the wrong guy. You can't even testify to that. You're banned from taking testimony. This was seen as a major problem. The 1850s is known as an era of weak presidents, and so I'm not going to even talk very much specifically about each of them. Zachary Taylor was elected in 1848. That's only a year removed from his service in the Mexican War. He's practically on active duty months before he runs for president. He runs right into it. The Whigs wasted no time. Remember, Taylor's position on slavery was that he didn't have a position. So note, Taylor is in the middle. Succeeded by Millard Fillmore. He's a northerner. He also doesn't really have a position on slavery. Franklin Pierce wins on the finality of the Compromise of 1850, ultimately arguing, again, for that middle position of drawing a line. James Buchanan, I believe, supports the popular sovereignty position, but again, a middle position. Now let's talk about those three positions. The slavery follows the flag versus non-extension of slavery. Those were really fringe positions. The two major parties stood in the middle. The major parties were always in one of those three middle positions, arguing popular sovereignty. Each state could decide. Or arguing, don't speak about it because it's too serious an issue. Or we need some type of compromise. Let's draw a line. Let's draw a line and stick to it. The Whigs and the Democrats, their official position for years had been in the middle. And the Mexican War, get this, the Mexican War does to the Whig Party, in the end, the Mexican War does to the Whigs what the War of 1812 did to the Federalist Party. The Mexican War ultimately, through its after effects, kills the Whig Party. Because the Mexican War put salt in the open wound of slavery in the territories, it makes that the issue. There's this huge swath of land. Slavery is an open question, and everyone has an opinion as to what to do. And it kills the Whig Party because they're unable to find a leg to stand on, because many Whigs want to oppose slavery. But if they did, then they would lose their Southern support, and so it undermines the Whigs. And that is what's so interesting about 1856, is the opposition is not a Whig, but this newly formed Republican Party, and they run John C. Fremont. And the Republicans do not take a middle position. This is how Southerners justify secession 4 years later when Lincoln wins. Is look at the diagram you've drawn in your notes or you see on the board, those middle positions that Whigs and Democrats took year after year after year. Popular sovereignty, don't speak about it. Compromise and draw a line. Compromise somewhere in the middle. They argue, look, the Republicans are extremists. They're on the far end. And therefore, they shouldn't be listened to. The Whigs, despite having more support in the North than South, were popular both places. They would win sometimes North, South, West. The Republicans would not even be on the ballot in Southern states. They are truly a sectional party, and that is very interesting. It's very dangerous for the stability of the country, for promoting sectional tension.